There was an article in The Athletic yesterday called Inside How MLB Teams Evaluate Player Makeup from Top Prospects to Big Time Free Agents. It is written by Inosaris and Chandler Rome. It is sparked by an interesting case. Framber Valdez had a very public incident that he has a side of his story too. Most people saw, and it looks like he was throwing at his catcher, right? And that sparks the whole makeup conversation. So I'm curious your thoughts on how you would handle a player like that. And we got some insight on how there's videos that are sent out, which is pretty common from free agents. And they put a lot in there about his character. So how do front offices evaluate that? And you know this, right? I'm not speaking for your group, but there are some front offices sometimes that miss where like I'm pretty on the outside and I'll hear like that guy is not good news. And it's like, why did they acquire him? And someone will say to me, that team doesn't do good enough homework on makeup.
Yeah, so Scott, it's a great question, and I think it's multi-layers. So I just would say this is, I think there's some teams that are very model driven in their decision making, and the bottom line is makeup doesn't really show up well in models. It's not empirical. It's a little bit softer. It's a little more subjective than it is objective. So when you talk about an eyebrow raised by you guys when you see a guy sign and you're like, wow, that doesn't seem as if it's going to align well. It's probably with a team that really isn't putting a ton of value on makeup at all because it's not measurable. I think in contrast, one thing that I've been party to, and I've been so fortunate in both Texas and Minnesota, one thing that we did is we employed former major league players to really help us sort through this discussion. So in Minnesota, two of our first hires when we got there were LaTroy Hawkins and Torrey Hunter. We then eventually added Justin Morneau and Michael Kadire to the group. And so what we would do is we would give them a list of free agents and say, hey guys, based upon your personal experience and or your friends in the game, can you find out what is it like to go shoulder to shoulder with this guy in a clubhouse? What is he like on the field? What is he like when things get tough? Because we wanted to get firsthand experience and knowledge on those things rather than us speculating. I think it's really tough for scouts to break this down because sometimes we see a guy who hits a pop up in the infield and he doesn't run it out, and all of a sudden we ascribe all sorts of negative attributes to them. It turns out that has nothing to do with it. So we want to talk to players who've either played with those guys and been in a clubhouse with them, or who can access players or coaches who have been in the clubhouse with them to find out exactly what's going on with these guys. So there's no surprises when we acquire them. And with Framber Valdez specifically, it's such a fascinating case. I actually had a chance to work with Ulysses Cabrera's agent this offseason because I am an independent person right now. He asked my opinion of how our front office is going to perceive him. He did put together a video, as you referenced, Scott, and the video is fascinating because usually these videos are hype performance videos. This is actually a 20-minute video, which really gives you insights into who Framber Valdez is, where did he grow up, what is his family like. It's the classic story of a guy growing up in a household with no electricity and no running water and really having to fight for everything throughout his life. It really put the person in perspective. And I think for teams that genuinely care about that, this will be a video that will probably open their eyes. For teams that maybe put less of an emphasis on makeup, it may not matter whatsoever. But the reality is this guy's been a really, really good performer for quite some time. Hits the market a little bit older than some free agents, but no fault of his own. This was because the Houston Astros probably tried to do a few things on the front end to extend his tenure with them. He's a year older, but he is one of these guys who is, throwing 6, 7 innings every single time he goes out there. I think that's going to get the attention of teams. They're all going to ask him what happened that night when he crossed up the catcher. As long as I think he's accountable, contrite, and sincere about his answer, hopefully he will be put in a position where the teams can look past that and he'll find the perfect team and the perfect fit for him to continue to showcase his talents on the mound.
That's great insight. I didn't know you worked with the team there. Even more interesting to hear how that all works. And yeah, I mean, it's obvious. It's not in this case something that is hidden because the one incident was very public. So it's cool to hear what goes on behind the scenes to then say, hey, one thing happened for 1 second. Let's talk about the other billion seconds that this guy exists around your team and what that's going to look like. So yeah,
Well,
appreciate you.
and Scott, I just would toss it to the players here for a second. Like I always felt in my career when I was evaluating a situation, if a guy was genuinely contrite about what happened, if there was a transgression, and I come from a team where we traded for Josh Hamilton, we signed Matt Bush. These guys had done some things in their lives which were challenging, to say the least. Both of those guys were genuinely accountable to their actions. They were contrite about that, and they were aspirational of doing better. And one of the litmus tests I always talked about was, can this person stand in front of a sixth, eighth, or 10th grade class of students and say, hey, listen, I made mistakes. Here were my mistakes. Here's what I learned from them. Don't do what I did. And if they can do that, then we're in a position where we all want to forgive guys, right? We want to give them second chances, provided that they're genuinely accountable for what transpired.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, oh, go ahead, Todd.
yeah, no, I mean, honestly, I think at the end of the day, we don't know what he was going through. People make mistakes. It's how you come back from it, and you give somebody an extra mistake or two, and you see how they come back from it. And listen, it looked bad, of course. It did on TV. You saw what he did. It looked like everything was on purpose, blah blah blah. But guess what? Do you know the person? Do you know what he was going through that day? Was there something on his mind? Okay, then let's get to know the guy first before you make judgment. Of course, love it.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree anymore. I think a lot of bringing guys into an organization, to your point, and I feel like I'd be a perfect guy for that job that you were speaking of, because I played on 10 teams. I played with so many different guys. It's hard to judge a guy off of one moment in their career. To Scott's point, that's 1 second of the billion seconds he's lived on Earth. Some of these guys, you have no idea where they came from, how they grew up, what they did. You know, Personally speaking, I had a moment in my career that, was the lowest of lows. And if people want to judge me for that one moment in time where I made a mistake, so be it. But if you ask anyone that I played with or that I've been in contact with, coaches, front office, players, they tell you that was just, a moment of weakness. I grew from it. I stood up. I was accountable for what I did. I moved on. I did everything I had to do in order to make it right with the group of people that I offended and that I was hurt from. But it would kill me if people still judged me for a moment on the field in the most competitive environment where I had a moment of weakness, and for Framber, he's been an outstanding pitcher. To me, what he did is totally forgivable. It was a moment of a weakness, a lapse in judgment, but he shouldn't be defined by the one moment of his career. He's been way too valuable of a pitcher. To your point, what he brings, he's been in an organization that's been, aside from maybe the Dodgers, kind of the gold standard of being in a competitive environment and building a culture. So hopefully people will either watch this video or go out and do their research. I've been a part of a lot of organizations where a GM will come down or is always present around the trade deadline, and he'll straight up be like, hey, we're thinking about getting this guy. What have you heard on him? Have you played with him? What's he like? They want to go down. Is he going to fit in this clubhouse? And if the answer is yes, he's going to fit in. And if the answer is like, he's a little bit difficult to handle, but I think what we've created in this clubhouse is enough to kind of bring him in, and he's not going to be a distraction because the talent is so great. You bring a guy in, and people could change depending on their environment and the people they're around. They could improve. So hopefully this is just a blip on the radar for him, something we're not talking about. Once he signs, and just allow his body of work to go kind of speak for him.
Well, and Kevin, I'll add one thing to what you just said there, which is one thing we did in addition to talking to some of our leaders when we are talking about bringing a guy into the clubhouse. We went and talked to the visiting clubhouse manager, and we asked him, "Hey, how does this guy conduct himself in the clubhouse? How does he interact with the clubbies? These are guys who are, he doesn't have to look up to them. He can treat them however they want to, and it's fascinating revealing how players interacted with clubhouse guys. And we canceled trades based upon what we heard from our visiting clubhouse guy in terms of the character we thought that the player may have based upon how he maybe mistreated some people in the clubhouse. And we've also enhanced our interest in players based upon the leadership that they showed in the clubhouse. So I think players should understand we're trying to do our homework. We're trying to get the best information we can. But the age old discussion around, hey, somebody's always looking, I think is somewhat true. Like, how do you conduct yourself when you think nobody's looking is part of how we're evaluating you. And then the last thing I'll say is we preach to our kids all the time. You're not defined by the adversity, but you're defined by how you respond to the adversity. We should afford our teammates the same luxury we afford our children.
Framber Valdez, KP, you provided great context on what happened and how you personally feel like you're someone that would forgive the situation, look at it as a one-off. The way our world works nowadays is something like that goes viral and somebody just, I don't want to say cancels them forever, but they're like, oh, I would never want him on my team. And hey, I get a little drastic sometimes like that. I'm not going to lie, right? I didn't play, so I'm looking at it from a different sphere. I'm trying to look at it as, if I own a team and he costs $150 million, am I okay with that? I'm not saying, hey, am I going to have another incident just like that? But is the character in line, right? Is this guy somebody that I feel like I can trust that's not going to be a problem? Because we know that he's a good pitcher. We know that he can pitch in a playoff game. We know that he can be a number 1 or 2 starter for a team for the next several years. But how do you think an owner looks at that?
Look, I don't want to get into specific names here, but there are people employed by teams, players, that have done a lot worse. And, it's recent news. So, and obviously the timing for him would have been good, but for his own individual, free agency, the timing couldn't be any worse. If this was 4 or 5 years ago, people are probably talking about it. The only reason it's still relevant is he recently did it. He's about to be a free agent, so you have to factor that in. But to Thad's point, we should give people a little bit more grace. We should give people the ability to go out, make an apology if it's sincere, give them an opportunity to prove people wrong. And teams are not dumb. Teams are going out and doing their homework, much to his point. And I love that conversation, being able to get into the mind of a GM and hear all these sort of things. The visiting clubhouse guy, the travel secretary, your nutritionists, your chefs, all these people, they're going to reach out to. In my opinion, Alex Anthopoulos is one of the best GMs in baseball because he's so real. He comes and talks to his players. And when I was in Atlanta, when I was in Toronto, most recently in Atlanta, these things would come up all the time. Hey, we're thinking about getting this guy. He would come sit at lunch or dinner with 4 or 5 of us and be like, hey, I know you played with this guy. What do you got on him? Will he fit in? I heard this. Do you think that's true? I talked to this person, So it's really, it is an important factor, but I don't think any one player should be defined by any moment on the field. Give them a chance to explain themselves. And like you said, you've never walked a mile in any one of these shoes. You have no idea what this guy where he had come from, the amount of adversity he had faced in his life. For him to be judged on this one cross up of his picture where, yes, it did look very intentional. You could look on the face that he was obviously upset with, maybe the way he was calling a game. But this guy grew up in a place that didn't have running water, probably slept on the floor. Like, let that be kind of the foundation of this guy's character more than this moment that kind of went viral.
Yeah, that's good insight. And hey, my last point on this, it says in the article, 80 seconds into a 25-minute video, the content switches from on-field results to fleshing out what kind of person Framber Valdez is. That's cool. I'm just like, whoa, 25 minutes? We're doing a Netflix doc? Let's maybe pare it down a little bit. I don't know if you're going to keep Todd Father on 25 minutes on anything, right?
Nope. No.
Yeah. What's the sweet spot, Todd Father? Maybe 5? Can I get 5 out of you if it's a good story?
No, you can give me 8 to 12.
Okay.
Yeah, Todd, to this point too. Like, we talked about a guy popping up in the infield and jogging down the first base like that. People don't know the entirety of what a player's going through. Like, there's a lot of times you're playing banged up and you've been told, hey, don't run hard down the line. I know that's a microcosm of what was happening, but like, we're just so quick to judge players from what we see and what is put on Twitter or Instagram, and it becomes these viral moments. But there's so much that goes on behind the scenes. Like, you could have a newborn at home and not have a lot of sleep, and you could just, not be in your right mind and go out and do something, and you're judged for it. It's like, at the end of the day, we're human beings. We have emotions. We have problems outside the field. We have lives outside the field. Like, things happen, but if you can stand up, and maybe that was maybe to his fault. He didn't get in front of the camera after that happened and said, hey, I made a mistake. It was a lapse of judgment. Like, I wasn't vibing with my catcher. I was upset. I made a mistake, or I got crossed up. I don't know what the scenario was, but the fact that he hasn't answered those questions, maybe that's, maybe the bigger story here, but it's not what he did. Allow people an opportunity to kind of, have a comeback story.
That's my only thing, guys. I know we got to run, but it's hard when you didn't get the public apology, kind of got the denial, and maybe things happen behind the scenes, but it helps. Like, it would help him. I know it sucks. And maybe I'm wrong here, guys, but everyone that looked at the video kind of feels the same way. I wish that he would have just come out, or even now, and said, like, I messed up. I'm a human. Can you feel me on this one? I apologize. Like, forgive me to the public and forever. And I think it would have played out better. That's me.
Yeah.
I think people do give forgiveness, but it seemed like there was the denial at the time, and we've never really gotten it. I'm sure the conversation's different with teams, but that's the main issue I have. Do you guys feel me on that one? Like, if he
Oh,
just
I
comes out and
understand.
says that
Oh,
part I think makes it easier. It's hard to look at the video and be like, that was a cross up. That was a real genuine cross up.
it's because, I think the biggest issue of the whole thing, and I'll just button it up, it's because he did it to his own teammate. You know, it
Right.
wasn't like he did it to somebody he didn't like. You know, he did, like, what was that about? And that's something that'll stick with him. You know, and there's far more horror stories. Don't get me wrong. The guy's okay. It could have been much worse. Don't get me wrong. But yes, he did it to his own teammate, and that's the problem that people are going to have with it.